I think, Karen, I think it's good to start. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Netherlands. Although online, of course, and not like some of you in May when we all physically met in Wageningen University for F&A Next. Some of you are not aware, but during F&A Next, which is a major matchmaking event in agri-food, we were able to bring 22, 21 Canadian delegates from across Canada to that event. And the topic that particular week for us was cell ag and precision fermentation. And I see a number of you, such as Wolfgang and Emily, but also Yadira from New Harvest that joined us today. Great to see all your faces again. Of course, this is not about me today, although for some of you, I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Diederik Beutener. I'm a trade commissioner here at the Embassy of Canada, working for the embassy for about 20 years now, mainly in agri-food and ag tech. And our office of 8 staff, 8 trade commissioners is established in the Netherlands to help and support you as Canadian organizations with your efforts here in Europe. We have in each of Europe's capitals, we have teams with trade commissioners that can help you. And please feel free to reach out if you need to talk to somebody in, let's say, Berlin or Madrid. We know exactly who you need to talk to. I see some more people joining. That's great. So let's move on to today's event. We have for you, we have the amazing, I would like to say, Karen Verzijden, who I've been following in the last 2 years, who spoke at several of the key events in precision fermentation, cell ag, and also came recommended by Dutch government, the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency. We met at F&A Next, right in the middle of our main session there for our Canadian delegation. And we decided after the event to do another webinar where Karen will basically take you as a group through the regulatory framework for cell ag companies. And that's what we're going to do today. We'll try and keep it, to a 30-40 minutes, I think, Karen. And I'd like to ask you all to, if you're not muted, I think you're all automatically muted, but to please mute yourself. The chat will be open in the next little while, so please do send me questions, and I'll interrupt Karen when there's real good questions popping up. And then we'll basically end the session and have another a chance to discuss any outstanding questions. But please, let's warm welcome to Karen. Karen, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Diederik. And wow, I've never been announced as the amazing Karen Verzijden. I hope I can live up to that expectations. Let me first thank Diederik for taking this initiative. I think your efforts for these Canadian startups, government officials, NGOs can benefit, hopefully you in the first place, but also Europe, because we want you here as well in the cell ag space. And what I hope to be doing in the next half hour is explaining a little bit, in rough lines, what it takes to get to market here. Prior to this event, I would also like to thank Yvette Hagemans, who's in the team with Diederik, and who took care of the practicalities. Yvette actually sent me the list of participations, and I noticed it's a nice mixture of companies. So hello, Umami Bioworks, hello, Ardra, hello, Opalia, hello, Genuine Taste, and many others. Hello, government officials. Also some EU peers, I noticed. Hello, Christian. Hello, Eileen. And also my 2 colleagues, Jasmin Buis and Max Baltz, are joining. Hello to you too. I'll start sharing my presentation and let's take it from there. There we go.
Yeah,
So
looking good,
normally
Karen. It's
you're
looking
able to
good.
see that. Yeah, as mentioned, we're going to talk about a regulatory framework if you want to come to market with your cell egg products. And before doing so, let me provide you a little bit of background on our firm, Axon Lawyers in Amsterdam. We are a life sciences firm, meaning that we work with companies active in the field of innovative food products in the first place. That's my professional interests. And my colleagues are also active in the field of medicinal products and medical devices. What do? We provide regulatory advice. So that is linked to the 30 minutes presentations I'll do today. And in addition, we're busy negotiating a lot of R&D and commercial contracts, specifically in this regulated field. And if needs may be, we're involved in dispute resolution, which could either be, enforcement measures by the supervising authorities, like here in the Netherlands, the Dutch Food Safety Authority or the Health Inspectorate, or competitors jumping on your back and wanting to buy a piece out of your market. Then we like providing assistance as well. We write a regulatory blog. You can see it here at the bottom. And the latest update there is on the first ECJ decision. That's the European Court of Justice on, the current novel foods regulation. So you can check that out whenever you have time. On the menu for today is first of all the concept of alternative protein. I chose to not only talk about cell ag during these presentations, but on the broader category of alternative protein. And why is that? That's because the same set of rules is applicable to all these products. And sometimes, as I'll explain during product qualification, it's not immediately clear what type of your product what product do we talk about, and then subsequently what rules are applicable. When we get to talk about market access, it basically comes down to filing an application for authorization. And I intend to inform you on what it takes to, what kind of data you should file in your dossier, how the procedure looks like, and what are the estimated timelines. And finally, if there's some time left, and Diederik, we agreed that's your responsibility, I'll also talk about the tastings framework that was recently set up here in the Netherlands. Basically, on a worldwide basis, there's only Singapore and the Netherlands that have a tastings framework right now. And since there's a lot of, interest, I think it might be valuable if I talk about that as well. Let's start with the introduction to alternative protein. And what is that basically? It's three types of products. First of all, the fermentation based products, and of course, the cell ag, because that's what we are going to talk about today, and also the plant based category. You could ask, how about eatable insects? For sure, they are a new type of protein as well. But I decided not to talk about these today because I noticed based on the list of participants that none of you is involved in that basis. But for the sake of overview, they certainly belong to this alternative protein. Looking a little bit more in detail, when we talk about fermentation-based products, there's also three different types of products that can be distinguished there. First of all, there's, the traditional fermentation-based products like yogurt and cheese, and they are created by using live microorganisms that kind of transform the products to create a unique taste. The second category that you can distinguish within this fermentation product type is biomass fermentation. And examples for these types of products are, for instance, corns products. So it's well being produced by leveraging fast growth and high protein content to produce very efficiently a large quantity of protein. And this large quantity, the biomass, forms then the major constituent of the product. Then finally, and potentially most importantly, we talk about precision fermentation. And this is a type of product using microbial hosts as to operate as kind of cell factories that are producing specific functional ingredients. And those are being perceived as being powerful enablers of improved sensory characteristics. And as an example, already currently on the market, you could think of Perfect Days dairy protein and also Impossible Hems Impossible Foods heme protein. When we look at the plant-based category, a very good example is, I would say, well, the Beyond Meat meats replacer, but you could also, well, consider not necessarily plant-based, but as a you could also consider a dairy alternative. And then we look, for instance, at well, the good food just egg products. When we look at the landscape, you can see that about 160 companies are active right now in this space, and that the amount of companies is approximately equally split amongst the US and Canada on the one hand, and Europe on the other hand. Although the number of companies may not be very large today, we've seen rapid growth over the well last 2 3 years, and we expect this growth to be exponential. Why is that? Because we need new solutions in a world meeting a lot of challenges, and we expect that these type of companies, bring these type of products, could contribute to those solutions. Just to name you a few examples, we've compiled a slide with many logos, of which you might recognize a few. First of all, for instance, entirely at the first row, ultimately left, this is Just, which is a synonym or well, trade name of the Good Meat company that was highly in the news because of its market approval, first in Singapore, but recently also in the US. And at the same time, I should mention Upside Food, um, format, but it's well, actually in the whole at the first row, there should be the logo of well, Upside Food. And the special part of both companies is that you can actually taste their products right now. For Just or the Good Meat Company, it is in a restaurant in DC, whose chef is called Jose Andres, and he's preparing a plate which is called Antichucos de Pollo. So it's a Mexican style plate in which he uses the cultivated chicken of Just. As for Upside Food, this company decided to join forces with the San Francisco-based three-star Michelin chef Dominique Crenn, who is a French lady, and who prepares very refined dishes using this product. So, whereas this, well, actually, the application of these products seemed kind of fairy tale only until I would say 2 to 3 years ago. Now this is reality. And so we see that companies, well, close by our venue, like the Dutch Mozemeat and Meatwall, they are working hard to scale up and to actually produce products. Another example here from Europe at the bottom left is Gourmet. That's a French company producing cultivated foie gras. In the middle, third row, Blue Nalo producing cultivated fish, and you may know many others. Super Meat, as a last example, at the bottom right, it's an Israeli company who has a rather original business model, I must say. They have a restaurant where you can taste their products, and it's separated with well, a glass window through which you can see the meat actually being produced. In some, cell egg food is getting there. Let's have a look at well, product qualification. And first of all, yeah, what is it and why is it so important? Well, in the EU, most of the cell egg products are likely to qualify from a regulatory point of view as novel foods. And that is actually valid for those products that are being made without the use of genetic modification. So what do you need to do? You need to, well, decide for yourself, or you should get some help to decide, does my product actually qualify as a novel food or potentially as a GM food? And depending then on that qualification, you can see which set of rules applies to the market access for your product. And after that, it only makes sense that I explain to you what are novel foods and what are GM foods. Um, Novel foods should satisfy two criteria to qualify as such. And the first is that they are actually new. And what does that mean? Well, in legal terms, they should not have been consumed by humans to a significant degree before 1997. And why 1997? Well, that's the cutoff date of our first novel food regulation, which meanwhile has been replaced by a new one that became applicable 5 years ago, 2018. The second criterion that should be satisfied is that a product should be captured by 10 predefined product categories, of which the two I have reproduced below are most likely to apply to cell egg products. Well, let's have a look. The first category 6 from the list of 10, that is, are products produced from cell or tissue culture derived from animals, plants, microorganisms, fungi, or algae. And or I'm stressing that because your food could also, well, fall within two categories, products that are actually using a new production method. Now, what does that mean? We have had a recent court guidance on this category specifically, which related to a food supplement that was rich in spermidine. Spermidine is a health food that is said to have many benefits, but you could actually also have too much of it. And the product at stake was produced using hydroponics. So seeds were being fermented in water. And in that way, they were enriched with spermidine to an extent that the products being produced in that way contained as much as 100 times more spermidine than products that had been produced in a conventional way. Now, because of that big difference, because of the difference in composition, which might affect, well, in the first place, the nutritional value, but potentially other factors as well, this was considered a novel food. And if you would like to read a bit more about new production procedures, you can actually check out the blog listed below. Now, so that's for novel foods. And let's talk now about GM foods. But I should then first explain what are GMOs. And in the European Union, GMOs are organisms that are, well, modified in such a way that does not occur in nature. The literal text says has been altered in such a way, and this is specifically the type, the wording that is not completely clear, because you could ask yourself the question: is that well, do we have to look at the end result by applying this process, or do we have to look at the process itself? And I'm stating that because in the US, it is rather the end result that is being taken into account, which is very wise, I think, because when looking at the process, um, it's not always possible to tell the difference between, well, GM products and products that have been produced in a more conventional way. Let me explain this to you more in detail based on a court case mentioned below. It was called the Confédération Paysanne because the procedure was started by a number of French agricultural organizations that was, well, heavily against a certain French decree, according to which products that had been obtained by targeted mutagenesis did not qualify as GM products, and they did not agree. And also, they wanted to ban the cultivation and the marketing of herbicide tolerant rape varieties. The French judge needed some guidance and basically asked to the ECJ, do these products qualify as GMO products? And the answer was yes. And this really caused shock and awe amongst, well, to the biotech country, because as I mentioned, quite often it's not possible to tell the difference between, well, products that have been used by targeted mutagenesis and products produced using more conventional techniques. So what happened afterwards? The Council of Ministers, so the representative of the EU member states, ordered the European Commission to do some research into the GM framework currently applicable. And the conclusion thereof was that it's basically no longer fit for purpose. After that, a new positive step was a new legislative bill, a new regulation that was published this summer, applying to so-called new genomic techniques. And I think this is a hopeful phenomenon, but for the time being, it only applies to plant innovations. I would love to see its application extend to cell egg product, but for the time being, that's not the case. But let's stay hopeful. Um, Let me see if I can see move this forward. Yes. So now that you know what GMOs are, we can see what is genetically modified foods. Basically, there are two different types. The first of which being food containing or consisting of GMOs, and the second one, food produced from GMOs. Now, whereas the first category is quite clear, it contains GMOs in the end product. For the second category, it's a little bit less clear. However, the DNA of genetically modified organisms can still be retraced in those types of foods. And for those foods to go to market, you would need to go through GMO authorization. This is, however, not the case for food products that have been produced with GMOs. And an example of such product categories are products that have been produced by using GMOs as processing aids. Let me give you an example because all of this might be a little bit abstract based on an EFSA opinion that was produced um, I think about 4 years ago, yes, 2019, relating to a powdered mixture of two oligosaccharides that was produced by fermentation using GM modified bacteria. However, these bacteria could not be retrieved in the end product, as was established on the basis of 5 demonstration batches that you need to file together with your novel food application. And on the basis thereof, it was said, well, free of GM. So not necessary to go through that route, but instead use the novel food route. I hope this example is sufficiently clear. And otherwise, I'm happy to answer your questions on that. Let me take you through a final slide on the distinction between GM products and novel foods, because on paper, the authorization procedure is quite similar because each of them require a comprehensive risk assessment by EFSA in the first place. And secondly, it will be the European Commission providing final clearance to go to market in close cooperation with the PAF committee. And I'll get to talk about that a bit later. The procedures are different in the sense that novel food procedures are introduced centrally using the Commission portal, and an application for a GM product should be made at the national level. And the idea is then that those procedures are initiated in a country where the product will be first marketed. But of course, you are free to, well, shop around a little and see if in some countries the procedure might be a bit more smooth than in others. As to the substance, novel foods focus exclusively on food safety, whereas the GMO procedure also takes into account, for instance, environmental issues. And finally, and that's nothing legal or scientific at all for the time being, while I would say the general public, I don't know, has not been enough educated or is not enough willing to embrace GMOs, there are some, well, I would call them ethical or political issues relating to GMOs, which in some makes it a wise decision to try for the time being to avoid to have GMOs in your product if you'd like to go to market in the EU. I don't know if there are any questions for now.
No, no questions so far. One of the things that I wanted to ask, we have, of course, CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Europe and Canada, EU and Canada. Does it mean that GM foods from Canada are now allowed on the EU market, or
That's a
Rick?
very topical question indeed. And that's one that, well, requires a bit more in-depth answer, which would take a bit more time than answering right now. Bottom line, this trade agreement provides, of course, a great way of access for Canadian products to the European market.
Mhm.
However, there is a legal basis for European member state to be able to, well, to temporarily bar the access for GM products if they see any health issues. So that's the general public health that might be touched upon. However, then there's a notification procedure to the European Commission, an approval procedure. So in some, they cannot block those products just like that, but they won't have access pretty quickly either. I hope that's enough for now. Of course, I can elaborate afterwards if there's more interest in this type of
Yeah.
question.
One question came in from Emily Farrar, um, to ask if you could give an estimated timeline for the approval process for novel food versus GMO foods. Or is that something you'll
Yes,
discuss in the
yes,
next
I
slides?
can, and I will do that in my upcoming slides.
Yeah. And then a question from Wolfgang. Wolfgang, who was also in Wageningen, asking if Canada also has a novel food category. Sorry, he says Canada also has a novel food category. Can they also be exported to the EU?
Yeah, I know that in Canada, novel foods are regulated indeed by the novel food regulations that are part of the Food and Drug Act in Canada. And once they have clearance in Canada, that would facilitate entrance into the EU. But a risk evaluation in line with the well, EFSA criteria would still have to be run. And I'll take you through that actually in the upcoming slides.
One last question, if you don't mind, Karen.
Sure.
Feluo, also in Wageningen, with us. She's asking, could you clarify if precision fermentation-based ingredients with GMO microorganisms, so no GM traced in the end product, will be GMO product or a novel food product?
I expect them to be a novel food rather than a GM product, if indeed it's correct that there are no traces of the DNA of the GM ingredient. And we have evaluated a few fermentation-based products in our practice to date. And for those, the conclusion indeed was that they qualify as novel foods.
Okay, thank you. That was it for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's have a look at the application procedure. And I've chosen to focus on the novel foods procedure rather than on the GM application procedure for the reasons that I detailed just now. As I mentioned, applications should be made centrally at the e-portal operated by the European Commission, and you should submit a dossier demonstrating the safety of your product. I'll detail the most important elements thereof based on my next slide. And the step directly taken afterwards is that the European Commission will validate your application. If elements are missing, you'll get to know that as well. You have the opportunity to supplement those. Then for cell egg products, the European Commission will most likely ask for scientific risk assessment by EFSA. So it will forward the dossier to EFSA. EFSA will then perform a suitability check, meaning that it will establish if the data submitted, so also the studies on which you rely in your application, can actually are capable of proving the safety of your product. If it considers that some data are missing, for instance, you are referring to certain studies in your application, but the studies at stake have not been notified, then they'll get back to you and you still need to do that. If everything goes well, EFSA will perform a safety evaluation. And if the opinion is positive, then the Commission will draft an implementing act, meaning the authorization of your product. But before that, the so-called Committee on Plant, Animals, Food and Feed, that's the PAF committee, will vote on the draft implementing act. And you should know that here it becomes a little bit political because the PAF committee consists of the representatives of all EU member states. And you may have heard that in some member states, the politicians at least are a bit less enthusiastic about cell egg food. So it is very important to get all those representatives on board to have a favorable decision. And you should know that the PAF committee decides by qualified majority, meaning that there must be a majority of at least 55%. And that should include the representatives of those countries should include more than or at least 65% of the EU population. So you can imagine that if large member states like Germany or France or Italy are not on board, that could have important consequences. At the same time, and also to reassure you, I know that a lot of activities are taking place, some serious lobby work to get the politicians to embrace the broader perspective that food innovation might go hand in hand with these wonderful traditional and conventional products. It doesn't have to replace those. So let's hope that these initiatives are fruitful and that we can see a lot of favorable tough decisions. As an average timeline, I've stated here 2 to 3 years. I think that's a realistic timeline based on the fact that the time for safety evaluation by EFSA, according to law, can take up to 9 months. And the time for the European Commission to publish its implementing act can take up to 7 months. Now, I hear you thinking that doesn't make up for 2 to 3 years. No, but in practice, EFSA may have additional questions. And that means that there will be a stop the clock request. So you as a company will be offered the opportunity to answer EFSA's questions. And sometimes you'll need to file additional information or even do additional research and to yield data that you need to supplement your dossier with. So during that time, of course, the teller goes on, the ticker goes on. And this is why I think that up to 2 to 3 years is a realistic timing period. Now, on paper, to answer Emily's question, that should not be so different for GMOs. However, in practice, we've seen something different. For instance, if we look at a product from Impossible Food, the soy leghemoglobin, an application for their product, which actually two applications have been filed back already in 2019 as a flavoring in the first place and as a GM product. And we haven't seen any progress really since the time. I cannot exactly tell you why, but it's a fact of life. And this is why, in reality, GM applications are more difficult to get through, to navigate than novel food applications. Also, what I expect is that EFSA's experience will grow as of the moment when many more applications in this particular field will be filed, which will help you because once EFSA will have more experience, I expect the risk evaluation to be more and more smooth. And there's a lot of guidance. I list the two most important documents that are the EFSA guidance and its technical report. Now, the guidance offers a common format how to structure your application and what type of data you should hand in, whereas the technical report provides mainly procedural guidance. And this technical report also takes into account the updates into law based on the transparency regulation that is in place since approximately 2 years. When you look up these documents, make sure that you have the latest version because the first publication thereof took place already in 2016 and they have been updated since the time. Also, please be aware that a new guidance document is expected for public consultation in Q4 of this year and expected for adoption and implementation in Q1 of the next year. And this guidance will in particular address, well, some more pre-submission advice based on the transparency regulation. You can have a session with EFSA prior to actually handing in your application, but for now you can only discuss the formal issues, procedural issues. Whereas, of course, I could understand that you may have some uncertainties as to material aspects. So the newly to expected guidance is to address those as well. Now, what are the key focus areas in novel food applications? Here they are. Of course, you should describe what product, what it's all about. So identify your product and define its compositional data. And for cell egg product, you should then, as a very minimum, describe what type of organ or what tissue is at the basis of your product, what type of culture media you've been using, what type of substrate you've grown the cells on. Those type of data should be handed in. And you should also characterize your product in quantitative and in qualitative terms, meaning that, yeah, you have to provide information on how much of what is inside, basically, also focusing on potential impurities, contaminants, and you should be able to demonstrate the stability of your product. And to do so, you should hand in 5 independently generated batches that should come along with your novel food application. Then you should also describe the production process. Do so using a flowchart because visible elements, I think it's the same for all of us, makes life easier. And it will immediately become apparent how your production process is structured. And then you should also demonstrate what measures for safety and quality control you have taken. Don't forget to take in post-harvest handling as well. So don't focus only on the production process itself, but also detail what happens afterwards. Once you have cultivated those cells, how are they extracted, so to speak? How are they transported to the next, well, processing place? Do you apply any drying techniques? How are they stored? All of that is of importance. When we address digestibility, it's about the entire journey your product makes through the body by addressing, the admission, the distribution thereof, the um, the journey it makes through the body, the metabolism, I mean, as well as the excretion. And in order to demonstrate that, as a very minimum, you should hand in some data representing metabolism and toxicokinetic data. And if these data are not available on public source, which is quite likely for really new products, you should generate those data yourself. Looking at allergenicity, please note that the default position for novel foods containing protein is that they have allergenic potential. So please focus on the composition of your product, its source, the production process, and the available experimental, potentially human data to explain that those risks are not imminent, or if they are imminent, how you suggest addressing them. Lastly, toxicity. Um, in principle, please note that toxicity studies are not a necessity per se to demonstrate the safety of your product, but as a general rule, the more processed your product is, the bigger the need to do those studies. And personally, I think that for cell egg products, it's quite likely that you may need to produce tox studies. Please note that EFSA uses a tiered approach, which I have reproduced here. It's a guidance from the EFSA ANS panel, already dating back about 10 years ago, but it's still being applied. And what I would like to demonstrate here is what it means, that tiered approach. It means that you're starting with the most basic studies possible, and only if you have positive data, meaning that, well, there might be alert of any toxicity, this constitutes a trigger to go on at the subsequent level to tier 3, and the same applies potentially for tier 3 studies. A final slide on the application process regarding transparency, which, as I mentioned, is in place in a specific regulation since about 2 years, and I call that a mixed blessing. Let me give you some background. It goes all back actually to a citizen initiative relating to the herbicide glyphosate, for which EFSA granted a positive opinion. And when many consumers were concerned about this product, they didn't really like this product, and it thought that EFSA had been a little bit partial, relying on the industry sourced studies rather than on any other data. And this is why the initiative was formulated that it should be completely transparent on which sources EFSA bases its risk evaluation. So as a result, for any regulated product, that's not only novel foods, but also, well, additives or flavorings or GM products, you should hand in, before actually you hand in your application, an overview of studies on which you rely in your application. And when we have a look at the definition of study, which I reproduced here from the EFSA practical arrangements, you can see that the scope thereof is actually pretty broad. And it could even apply to studies that you have performed in-house. Note that some pretty recent guidance, it was last week, from that it became clear that any method validation studies, those are outside of the scope of these study notifications. So it's really when it's really about the product itself and demonstrating the safety thereof, those studies should be notified. And you should so in due course. Otherwise, there's a risk of delay in the evaluation of your safety evaluation, and that's not what you want. Basically, if EFSA notices that a study was erroneously not notified, then there will be another stop the clock, so to say, for 6 months. And only after those 6 months have expired and you have handed in um, the study, you've notified that study, then they will resume the risk evaluation. I hope you can understand why I call this a mixed blessing. Any
Karen,
questions so far, Diederik?
yeah, quite a few, and that's good. Wolfgang asks if you know, are the submitted EFSA dossiers, are they public, Karen?
Yeah, very pertinent question. After studies have been notified, they will become public if the notification of studies is followed by an actual application. As an applicant, you can also file a request for confidentiality, meaning that you do not want certain data to be published. And you can do so for, well, sourcing data, very confidential manufacturing methods, except if that information is vital for the evaluation of safety. So as a short answer, yes, those studies are public unless you succeeded to have either protection of confidentiality, or that's another option, if you obtain data protection. And whereas confidentiality protection lasts forever, you can also have data protection that relates to, well, basically proprietary data. For instance, a very costly tox study that you've undertaken, and that protection lasts for 5 years. And if you
Okay.
obtained that protection, and actually, if you look at the union list of novel foods, there's quite a few of companies that have obtained that protection. And I can understand that, because if you've made a heavy investment, you do not want your neighbor potentially to use that information to manufacture the same product. However, that neighbor can come to you, and you can decide to license your method. But you do have an extent of control, and I think that's reasonable.
Another question came in from Jennifer, and she's asking how many applications for alternative proteins are in the pipeline to date. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, sure. Very pertinent question indeed. For cultivated meat, we haven't seen any applications yet, but I'm quite confident that the first will be filed before the end of this year. For products based on precision fermentation, there are a few pending already. They do not exceed, I know, I would say 10 or 20, but their number rapidly grows. And you can actually have a look at the European Commission website, because after it's not immediately, but within a few months after application, a summary thereof will be based at the Commission website.
Okay. And Fei asks, can there be in vitro studies for digestibility, or does it have to be an in vivo animal study?
Very good question as well. I remember when studying the transparency regulators, so the latest kid on the block, so to say, in the recital, so that's the introductory remark, it is mentioned that animal experience are at best avoided. But I know, and it is recognized also by the European Commission, that for certain data, you just cannot get around it. So if there's no other way around it, it may be a necessity to do in vivo studies, but if there's any means to avoid them, that will be the preferential way.
Okay. A last question for now, Karen. When you look at EU-based cell ag companies, are they and how they handle their attitudes towards GMOs? Emily says she's seen many companies that build IP around genetic modification to cell lines. Are they planning to enter the market abroad instead, or Are they anticipating the attitudes will change?
I think it's both of them. I know about a few EU-based companies using GM ingredients in their manufacturing methods that also end up in their end products that anticipate market entry in other parts of the world initially. However, the EU represents a 400 million consumers market, so it's just too large market to be ignored. And what you see right now is that there's a lot of consumer education taking place via the um, associations of, well, cell ag companies. There's Cellular Agriculture Europe, which takes a large role in that. And I think also GFI plays an important role to educate the general public and also to do market research. For instance, GFI has performed market research into the denomination of cell ag products. And even if we know that, well, there are some political initiatives to ban those products for the market, it actually resulted from those studies that the general public is quite curious and very open to try, at least to try them. So yes, I think it's a question of both market access initially elsewhere, but in the end, and based on hopefully a lot of fruitful education also in the EU.
Okay, that's it for now, Karen.
Okay. We'll get to taste a little bit. We still do have some time, Diederik. I don't hear we don't, so let's just continue. Yeah, well, since this summer we have a framework for tastings here in the Netherlands. It's called a code of practice for safely conducting tastings, and it specifically relates for now to cultivated foods. And it was drafted with having in mind the cultivated meat companies here in the Netherlands, and there's two of them. Some background to this code of conduct. There were two members of parliament that took great action for this industry, stating or drafting a motion that was supported by a majority of parties of the Dutch parliament, urging the Dutch government to work together with the cultivated meat companies to create a framework to confront the general public with their products, because they understand it's important to have exposure to future consumers. However, if you don't have market approval yet, there's a kind of catch 22. Um, Important funding was released by the Dutch National Growth Fund to a consortium of companies, organizations, and also public bodies, all situated around cell ag products. And a grant for the amount of 60 million euros was released, but not just like that. Of course, the consortium received a mission, and that was implementing a specific cell ag growth plan based on 4 pillars, namely education, research, upscaling, and knowledge sharing. And the ambition, yes, was to make the Netherlands a global leader in the cell ag space. How a small country thinks really big. There's some history, though, to this big ambition. It all goes back to Willem van Elen, who was sometimes referred to as the father of cultivated meat. He was a researcher at the Wageningen University, kind of inventing cultivated meat. And his daughter, Ira van Elen, is now very active in this space as well, and also a part of this consortium. So we do have indeed some very clear guidelines how to conduct tastings, and I will share some further details with you afterwards. Not before saying that those guidelines heavily lean on a recent report by the FAO and the WHO, in which the safety of cell-based food was evaluated. And what did they do? Important questions were asked to an expert panel regarding, in the first place, cell sourcing, then cell growth and cell production, cell harvesting, and food processing. And in sum, their conclusion was that many potential hazards linked to these products, they are actually already known, and they are not very much different from those linked to conventionally produced products. However, the focus may need to be on the specific ingredients used, as well as, well, the equipment and manufacturing methods. So what do you need to do if you want to participate in these tastings? You need to file what I would call a so-called baby novel food dossier containing specific information. Well, here again, the description of your product and the production process by detailing the type of cells, the animal origin, and a very positive thing, if you use some deliberate modification of the cellular genome, that should be indicated, meaning that companies using GM technologies in the production of their product can participate in these tastings as well. As for the composition and the production process, well, describe how all that takes place, detail the culture media, including potential growth factors, antibiotics, other relevant elements. And please note that any legally forbidden constituents in food, you should not use them in the tastings either. Then you should document the safety, well, basically of all constituents, and you should do so by referring to authoritative sources like EFSA, like FDA, or EMA potentially, that's the European Medicines Agency. And for any new substances with a known or suspected genotoxic activities, you should know those you can't use. As to the content of the relevant components, detail their microbiological status, the amount to be ingested, and, well, detail the total amount per person, as well as the amount per kilogram body weight. And all of that you should document in a pre-formatted table. That's the way it looks. And you can see at the right column that if there's any constituent that of concern that needs consideration, you should, of course, provide as much safety information as possible. What does the procedure look like? Well, you can only involve participants who really want to do that on a strictly voluntary basis. They should not have any known allergies, and if women are involved, they should not be pregnant. They should act based on an informed consent, and they should not be paid. So you cannot go into university and well, resemble tens of students, buy a very nice treats financially, because that's not allowed. The setting of your tasting should be documented, as well as who does actually participate, how your product is prepared, and if ever there are some adverse events up to 2 weeks after the tasting, those should be documented. And all of that should be submitted to an expert committee consisting of 4 experts. And they are intended to be a toxicologist, a microbiologist, a physician, and an expert in the field of ethics. And, well, they should evaluate your protocol, so to speak, just like an ethical committee evaluates a protocol for clinical research. And then you can obtain an approval which is valid for 10 tastings. And the entire experiment, as it's called, for now is valid for 1 year. But after that, it is expected to be extended. And after that, it's also expected to be extended for foreign companies as well. The Netherlands government did not want to do that immediately because it was afraid that, well, so many companies would try to set up tastings here that they could not be accommodated. So they first want to gain experience, and afterwards it is expected that, well, the framework will extend. I know from, well, recent information with my clients basically that the Food Standards Agency from the UK is very much interested to set up a similar framework, and so is the Czech Republic. So this brings me to my conclusions that if you want to go to market with your cell ag product, prepare a robust regulatory strategy and do so on the basis of the truckload of guidance that is already available. And based on that, well, I think you would be in a position to prepare a good quality dossier and do so, or at least consider doing so, having a multi jurisdictional approach in mind. Because for you as Canadian companies, it makes sense, of course, to hit the market first in Canada. However, if you design your data strategy such that you might use the data using in Canada as well as in the EU, that could be a very wise strategy. Also, focus as of the start on safety and quality, because that's, well, a no-brainer for any food company, and the same goes for cell ag companies. Get familiar with those transparency requirements we just discussed. And even if the EU is not your primary market, consider notifying your studies already, because if you want to hit the market, it will already have been done. So you won't face any delays because you still need to do that. And if you don't go to market, your studies won't be published anyway. Finally, I already mentioned them. I think Cellular Agriculture Europe and GFI are here to help, and I really can recommend that you get familiar with them as well. That was it. I'm happy to take any further questions if there are any.
Yes, Karen, thank you so much. This was wonderful. There are a few more questions. So, for example, Faye was asking and wondering if during tastings, is there let me move to the next question. Do tastings include swallowing the food, or is there a guideline for tasting without swallowing, like tasting and spitting out?
It's not a wine product, right? No, tasting really implies the whole thing. So up to and including swallowing, indeed. And this
Okay.
is why the code of practice also provides for potential adverse effects. I think if you only smell the products, adverse effects are not really likely. Hopefully, they are not likely after swallowing either. But yes, swallowing is included.
And another question from Faye. For materials needed for EFSA approval, do you observe good compatibility with data needed for US FDA GRAS, or are there unique food safety evidence pieces you found needed specifically for EFSA?
Frankly, I cannot answer that question for materials, but I can answer that question for laboratories, for which the European regulations state that, well, any research normally should be done in accredited laboratories. However, I assume that it doesn't make a difference if they're accredited in the US or in the EU.
Okay. Yeah, similar type question from Yadira from New Harvest. She's asking, are there any preferences for studies performed by independent labs versus the ones performed by the companies?
I would recommend to go for the accredited labs. However, I know from experience before doing so, you may do some in-house experiments, if only to direct your studies. And if after doing so, you realize that these experiments are valuable as well, they produce valuable data, and you would like to refer to them in your application as well, then you should also include them in your application and notify them. But for means of objectivity, I think the better case is for the independent accredited labs.
And then last question from Faye. Does the tasting allow for food items formulated with ingredients made for precision fermentation? Sorry, ingredients made with precision fermentation or only for cultivated meat? This is about Dutch tasting.
Yeah, I have it here at hand.
Oh.
It says tasting for cultivated foods, but these have not been defined in detail. I know that the code has been drafted with two companies present in mind, which are the cultivated meat companies, and so for sure they are captured. And
Yeah.
I think the purpose is to really have that extended because there are so many more valuable products. But for the time being, the focus is on the cultivated meat products. However, time travels fast, and it came into force just 2 months ago. So the year will be over July next year, and it may be updated as of then.
Okay. Last question came in. Do you have any insight, Karen, about why Impossible, the company Impossible, is GMO food rather than novel food? Faye believes that their ingredient, the ingredient of Impossible, is made with GMO organisms. Any
Yeah,
idea?
that's correct. And they are using, basically the GM organism is, there's difference between extracellular modifications and intracellular modifications. And for them, the latter category applies, and traces thereof can be found back in their end product. So this is why, in addition to the applications for a flavoring, which they basically are, this is the function which their heme product performs, they also need GM clearance.
Clear, clear. So this was the list of questions we went through. For the audience, just maybe good to know that all of you that were scribbling notes for the last hour, of course, we're sharing the deck that Karen provided us. And we also recorded this session, so you can watch this session at a later stage. I know Dwayne Holmes, for example, from New Harvest, was not able to make it today, and really appreciated seeing the session. So everybody that registered will get this information. In case you have not registered or somehow feel that there might be a mistake made, just send me a quick note and I'll make sure you get it. There's one last question coming in. Oh, thanks, Karen Dietrich, for organizing. So helpful. Here from Jennifer. And I think we're here at the end of the event. Love to see you all again in the next few months. I'm sure there will be events where we all will be attending. Karen, I think we had a fantastic 1 hour, 5 minute event. So thank you so much again for preparing, working with us, and all the technicalities in the last few days. Always fun doing these online events. On behalf of the Embassy of Canada, I think we've really found a wonderful support in you and your company, Axon, in Amsterdam. We'll see each other again. Thanks everyone for joining us, and again, hope to see you soon.
Thanks for joining, and thanks for your active participation. I enjoyed it really very much.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone. Bye bye. À bientôt.
Bye bye.